Thank you for joining us on this short video. My name is Laurent Arnon. I work as Senior Advisor at the Ethical Trading Initiative. The Ethical Trading Initiative is a leading alliance of companies, trade unions, and NGOs that promotes respect for workers' rights around the globe. And I'm here with Eloise.
Hello, I'm Eloise Saville. I'm Private Sector Advisor at Anti-Slavery International, and I work in the Business and Human Rights team. And Anti-Slavery International is proud to be the world's oldest human rights organization.
We are very pleased to present the guidelines for employment and integration of people displaced from Ukraine, and proud to say that this is the result of a collaborative effort between brands, NGOs, and other multi-stakeholders organizations convened by ETI to work collaboratively. So this short video and the resource that will be presented are aimed at brands and suppliers who can take action to protect and facilitate the employment and integration of people displaced from Ukraine. Over the next 15 minutes, we will talk to you through these guidelines and why they are important, how they've been developed, and we will give you an overview of how they can help you reduce the risks to workers displaced from Ukraine. We will emphasize your role and the rollout and the different implementation of the different resources. So since the start of the conflict in Ukraine, over 8 million people have been displaced and crossed into neighboring countries. And for many of who have been displaced by the war, finding an employment will be crucial to their economic survival and integration. And we know that displaced populations face a variety of barriers and risks, the lack of documentation, language barriers, or the lack of access to information that can put them to higher risks of various forms of labor exploitation, including human trafficking. Women, who constitute a large proportion of the people displaced, are at a higher risk. And immediate humanitarian assistance needs to be accompanied by longer-term sustainable initiatives that contribute to the integration of displaced people in the host communities, including employment. So to collectively work and to reduce the risks to workers displaced due to the war in Ukraine, ETI convened brands, NGOs, trade unions, and other organizations in a working group to facilitate knowledge exchange and develop a guidance to identify as well what good practice should look like. So the guidelines we are going to present you provide recommendations in the format of do's and don'ts and resources to support the employment and integration of displaced people from Ukraine with secure, decent, safe, and fair work. It was developed in close collaboration with Anti-Slavery International and with the inputs from organizations such as the International Organization for Migration, International Trade Union Federation, Fairware Foundation, and AIM Progress. So to implement those guidelines, we need a collaborative effort and a cross-sector effort. So this is why we are collectively adopting and sharing those guidelines with a large number of buyers and brands who are going to roll those guidelines in their own supply chains, many of which took part in the working group. This is a joint effort to strengthen the due diligence and the protection measures in supply chains in response to the war in Ukraine. And to provide us with an overview of the risks, but also of the main points of these guidelines, I will now pass over to Eloise.
Thanks very much, Laurent. So first of all, to say that we have identified risks in multiple sectors, and these include in agriculture, in warehousing, and in logistics. But this guidance is really for cross-sector. And these risks are heightened where there is little transparency, where there's subcontracting, or even when there's undeclared subcontracting. And businesses really have a crucial role in preventing exploitation of people, both in their operations and also in their supply chain. And this does apply for both brands and suppliers. So in this guidance, we've identified do's and don'ts in each area for guidance to help support the employment of refugees and also to help give understanding of how to reduce the risk of abuse of workers. But this shouldn't be read as an exhaustive list of actions. So I'll now go through each section and give you a bit of an example from each of them, but the full detail can be found within the guidance. So firstly, recruiting displaced workers from Ukraine. We know that there's high risk of labour exploitation, which has been identified due to a lack of safeguards around recruitment practices. And these recruitment practices are being used to meet the high demand for workers in various sectors. And we know that many jobs are being offered exclusively to refugees by both on-the-ground recruitment agencies and also online, including on social media. But there are really little or no safeguards to assess whether these jobs are legitimate or if they're safe. So this is why it's really important to identify and also to monitor recruitment practices in your supply chain and in your operations through increased engagement with workers or with suppliers to really mitigate that risk. And this risk in recruitment practices also includes the risk of workers paying fees to secure jobs, which is the largest driver of debt bondage and exploitation. So we've outlined the necessity to ensure that recruitment fees or related costs are covered by the employer and not by the employee. We've also outlined the risks related to third-party labour providers and how to ensure that they're operating with high ethical standards, which you can find in the guidance. So when commencing employment and looking at language requirements, we know that there's social barriers such as not being able to speak the local language, which place workers at a high risk of being targeted and their vulnerability being exploited. And this is why it's crucial that employment terms and conditions and contracts and any information that workers are provided with around their rights are in a language that they understand. This does also include all training and information on health and safety and labour rights. And this also can be achieved through signposting to resources which are provided in the ETI resource base database. It's also important to ensure that all workers understand how to raise any issues they may have. And this involves communicating a clear mechanism in which workers can raise grievances for any exploitation or discrimination they may be faced with, and make sure that they can do this with anonymity, such as through internal or through external whistleblowing lines. And then it's also really important the managers at the workplace know how to respond immediately if they are alerted to potential indicators of exploitation, which we've outlined here in this section. People who are unable or potentially reluctant to register for the EU Temporary Protection Directive may be barred from access to official services and support, which make them more vulnerable to exploitation. So this is why we've included making sure that you support workers to obtain documentation, and particularly for those who are not supported by the EU's Temporary Protection Directive. And we've outlined the support that you can get in the ETI resource ETI resource database. So now in the documentation and payment of wages section, this is really looking at ensuring that all workers are provided with at least the national minimum wage, weekly rest days, and are also being paid equally to or no less than other workers for the same job or qualification. There's a risk to workers if they're being paid cash in hand, because this adds a safeguarding risk and puts people in an increasingly vulnerable position and also exposes them to exploitation. So we've outlined the necessity to ensure that all workers have access to their wages, and ideally through an individual bank account. Workers' original identification documents also should never be kept, as this poses a great risk of exploitation. However, if they do give written permission that they want their original identification documents to be kept, they can be kept, but in an individual and lockable storage to which they have immediate access. So now in the accommodation and transport section, we've outlined the necessity to ensure decent living conditions for workers and their families, including children who are housed in residential complexes. And we know that the vast majority of refugees, as Laurent has outlined, who have fled from Ukraine since the Russian invasion began, are women and children, and we are concerned about the risk to them of exploitation. And many people may also be experiencing difficulties in accessing rights and protections. So we've provided details of support services for workers, such as for housing, for education, healthcare, childcare services, and psychological support, and also financial support. There are also transport risks for refugees, and we've seen reports of refugees being offered transport with no safeguards or checks. So this is why it's important to monitor the provision of transport for workers to ensure that there are no opportunities for exploitation. Supporting workers' integration and well-being. We've seen many reports, sadly, of discrimination to those with non-Ukrainian nationality who are fleeing the conflict. And there have been many reports of racism and discrimination at the borders and in accessing support or assistance in neighbouring countries. So we need to really strongly communicate an opposition to discrimination. Specific remediation plans should also be in place to address any abuses that do occur, including discrimination. And this must also include child labour remediation plans, which cover things such as safeguarding or reimbursing income lost, and support with education. And in order to do this, we would recommend partnering with support organisations or charities and trade unions who can provide support to workers who've experienced exploitation and help develop this action plan for remediation if exploitation has been identified. And also those who can offer psychological support potentially to refugees who may be experiencing trauma due to fleeing the war. People may also be at high risk who have fled Ukraine, who are undocumented or stateless, and they are not being provided with protection. So it's really important not to expel any refugees from the factory, as this puts them in a more vulnerable position, or from your workplace. And in any case in which you do identify undocumented workers, then it's really important to assist them and to support workers to obtain legal documents. And then finally, looking beyond your company. We're also encouraging you to look beyond your direct operations by engaging with subcontracting factories to detect exploitative recruitment and also to prevent undeclared subcontracting. So this involves engaging with any subcontracted factories, farms or service providers to ensure that they're implementing good recruitment practices and working conditions, and including recommending that you share this guidance document with them. Thank you very much. I'll now pass back to Laurent.
Thank you, Eloise, for taking us through the guidance and highlighting all the risks, but also those do's and don'ts that seem very important to be able to protect the workers displaced from Ukraine. So the guidance itself is being translated in Polish, Romanian, and Italian to facilitate its implementation and can be accessed on ETI's webpage. It is also accompanied by the local resource database that Eloise has mentioned. This is a catalog of contact details to local organizations in each of the relevant countries where suppliers can turn for further support and information. So you will now play a very important role in bringing this guidance to life and implementing them. So we recommend for brands and buyers to share this guidance across their supply chains and with the relevant internal and external stakeholders, including compliance team, purchasing teams, and auditors. Also, we recommend brands to collaborate and support their suppliers in implementing the guidance. For the suppliers and the supply chain partners, we encourage you to familiarize yourself with the recommendations provided by the guidance, to further refer to the local resource database on ETI's website in case you need more support or additional resources to implement the guidance locally. To further strengthen the protection and measures of in the supply chain, we also recommend that you share the guidelines with your own suppliers and business partners and work with them to increase their understanding of the risks to workers coming from conflict zone within their operations. And for both, we suggest to collaborate and continue to collaborate and support each other. This is a collaborative effort to protect the displaced worker fleeing from Ukraine. And in this ever-changing situation, maintaining a communication between business partners across the supply chain will be crucial to ensure that we remain agile and respond to the risks where they are identified. We also strongly recommend to continue this communication between business partners, as we would like to be able to hear your views on the utility of the guidance and that we have created, and also being able to provide with any additional support where it might be needed. So to this aim, we will communicate a short survey to the brands at a later stage, but it would be important for the suppliers to be able to report to any feedback and information they would like to share with the brands and the buyers in the next few weeks as they implement the guidance. So brands and buyers are going to circulate this guidance amongst their supply chain partners, and all the resources mentioned are freely accessible on the ATI website. So we strongly believe that these guidelines form a useful resource to help business partners across supply chains to identify what actions can be taken to support the provision of secure, decent, and safe work for those fleeing Ukraine and entering the laboring market in neighboring countries. So we would like to thank all the partners who contributed to the development of these resources, and thank you as well to play an important role in this collaborative effort and taking the time to watch this video. Thank you.